and the support he needs to take the United Kingdom out of the European Union in January. Let's get the very latest now. SABC News correspondent in the United Kingdom, Holly Hudson, is back with us. Holly, a very good morning to you once again. Talk to us about the reaction coming from world leaders.
Hello. Well, yes, definitely. There's been a huge reaction here and around the world. Of course, we have already heard from Donald Trump congratulating his friends, saying that it leaves Britain free to do a lucrative trade deal with the US. It'll be more lucrative, he claims, than the one that we currently have with the EU. But here in the UK, a lot of people waking up this morning with different reactions because, of course, this was, as Boris Johnson described it himself, a stonking victory for the Conservatives. His gamble has paid off, and in spectacular style as well. The way it works here in the UK, of course, is that a party needs 326 seats in the House of Commons behind me here to form a government and form a majority. The Conservatives currently have 368, so they've surpassed that threshold incredibly, and of course it gives Boris Johnson the mandate, the support that he needs to easily pass his withdrawal agreement through Parliament. That is, of course, why he called this election, this snap election in winter in the first place, to break, as he called it, the gridlock and get Brexit done. And as it stands, he will do that potentially even before Christmas, but certainly by the deadline of January 31st. So next month, as it stands, the UK will be leaving the European Union.
So we have this deadline of January 31st. What happens from now till then?
So what we will likely see now is next week the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson made with the EU will go through the House of Commons and be ratified. But the interesting part now is that once that deal goes through Parliament, Britain enters what's known as a transition period. And that is when the UK and the EU are expected to agree their future relationship, their sort of post-Brexit relationship. And that covers everything from defence to trade to fishing, and Boris Johnson and his Conservative government have pledged in their manifesto to get that done by the end of December 2020. And if you speak to experts here, and of course even those across the channel and in the EU, Michel Barnier, the former EU chief negotiator, even said that that is pretty unrealistic to expect to agree a trade deal in that time with the EU. Of course, the UK and the EU completely enmeshed in many ways. It took Canada over 7 years to agree a similar trade deal. So many people here saying Boris Johnson would have to work at breakneck speed in order to do that.
Holly, we were told that these elections were very, very tight, but it seems like it's going the other way around. I mean, we were told that the UK is polarized with regards to Brexit as well. What does this vote say, or this result say, about the appetite, I guess, for Brexit?
Well, yes, the country is still very polarised on Brexit, and this has been framed as the Brexit election, and in many ways it can be now referred to as a victory for vote leave once again, because of course Boris Johnson's slogan that he much repeated throughout this campaign was "Get Brexit Done," and that is what seems to have resonated with the public. That is what has turned, we think, many of those stronghold safe Labour seats up in the north, across Wales, the Red Wall as it's known, to the Conservatives. Some seats that have always voted Labour for years, for decades, since the 30s, the 50s, have turned to the Conservatives. We've seen a 10% swing in some seats. So Boris Johnson, very aware that he has seduced many of those voters over to the Conservative Party for the first time, and says that he is solemnly committed to the pledges that he's made, not just on Brexit but domestically as well, in terms of the NHS, thousands of extra nurses, thousands of extra police officers, an Australian style points immigration system too. But does he have the finances to back up those pledges? Of course, for Labour, this was a disastrous result for them, a crushing defeat. Jeremy Corbyn has said that this was the Brexit election, and Labour's Brexit policy will no doubt be, is already being blamed by Jeremy Corbyn and many others in the party as their reason for their failure. This is their worst result since the 1930s, and of course Labour tried to straddle the two camps really of Remain and Leave with their policy, saying they would renegotiate a Brexit deal and then put it back to the people in a second referendum, and that really doesn't seem to have landed for them, and that's what's led to this crushing defeat. Jeremy Corbyn, though, not as yet, saying that he will stand down. He has said, though, that he will not lead the party in the next election. But of course, this defeat, many now saying, means that Labour won't actually see will not return to power at all in the 2020s, as this is a defeat they just can't come back from by 2024.
Holly, this victory no doubt will have a ripple effect across the world. What would it mean for countries in Africa? We see this UK-Africa summit coming up in February next year. We could see this rearrangement of trade relations.
Yes, certainly. Well, Boris Johnson and the Conservative government will now be looking, of course, to the next stage of the Brexit process, which, as I said, is this transition period where they do have to agree a trade deal with the EU. But, of course, they will soon be free to shore up other trade interests around the world. Donald Trump, as I've mentioned already, mentioning a US-UK trade deal. And, of course, Boris Johnson and the Tory government will need to shore up trade interests elsewhere as well, including Africa. You may remember Theresa May visited the continent last year and promised a big post-Brexit investment boost, £4 billion, and that was seen as a sort of a sign of renewed interest part of Britain in terms of Africa and the economy and business interests there. A continuity trade deal has already been agreed. That's sort of a rollover of the free trade agreements that the UK has with the EU and other countries, and that's been signed with 6 countries, including South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Mozambique and Eswatini. That ensures the sort of rollover of those free trade agreements, and between those 6 countries there's almost £10 billion worth of trade as well. So there's no doubt going to be, we'll no doubt see Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, maybe even Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and maybe even Boris Johnson himself paying a visit over the next sort of coming months to shore up those trade interests that the UK desperately needs now. It is certain to leave the EU.
So when can we expect to hear from Boris Johnson?
Well, we've already heard from him this morning. He is now back in Downing Street. He has hailed this as a new dawn for Britain and said that this is an historic mandate that he's been given to deliver Brexit and deliver on the promises as well that he's made in terms of his domestic agenda, because of course this means that Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party are in power for the next 5 years. But what will happen now for the rest of the day? Boris Johnson will go and see the Queen to ask to form a new government, and then we will hear from him outside Downing Street later on today as well.
All right, Holly Hudson, thank you very much indeed for keeping us up to date. We'll try to catch up with you a little later on to get the very latest with regards to the election results there. Holly Hudson, live for us in the UK.